Having never played the original Path of Exile, I was skeptical about diving into its sequel. The concept of grinding endless chaos dungeons never appealed to me. However, with all the hype surrounding Path of Exile 2's early access and a lull in Lost Ark's content, I decided to give it a shot, and to my surprise, it's been a refreshing and engaging experience. My background with ARPGs is somewhat minimal. My experience with Diablo is limited to a few hours of Diablo 3 couch co-op years ago, and a brief stint with Diablo 4's free weekend. Most of my familiarity with the genre comes from Lost Ark, where I've sunk over 10,000 hours. Despite the shared camera perspective and gameplay inspirations, there wasn't too much else similar, so I approached Path of Exile 2 as a complete novice to the genre, going in blind to its systems and mechanics. At the time of writing this, I've spent over 50 hours in the game, progressing through the first 3 acts and just stepping into the pre-end game. Unlike others who rushed to the endgame content in similar amount of time, I chose to explore at my own pace, taking time to learn and enjoy the intricacies of the game. This approach, while slow, has been pretty rewarding, allowing me to savor the journey rather than focus solely on the destination. Given the influx of over 500,000 plus players to these new fresh servers, the early access launch was impressively smooth. While there was some initial server hiccups, they were resolved fairly quickly, and I was able to jump in with minimal issues. Compared to other major releases, this is one of the most seamless launches I've experienced. That said, I was initially disappointed by the lack of character appearance customization. Customization has always been a feature I enjoy, as I like to attempt 30 minutes of creating myself before giving up, but I soon forgot about this as gameplay drew me in. Choosing the monk class was out of character of my Oonga Boonga tendencies, but I was intrigued by the bell skill I'd seen in previews. The impactful combat animations and responsive gameplay immediately impressed me, setting the tone for an engaging experience. I don't know how to explain this, but one of my first tests of any game is the translation of the physicality of an attack. If a simple attack feels like it has oomph, then I'm off to a good start. And Path of Exile 2 had that, so I was a pretty happy camper. The early game begins with straightforward mobs and basic mechanics, gradually introducing more complexity. The first significant challenge came in the form of an orc-like huge boss that killed me repeatedly, basically the first boss you interact with. It was a humbling experience that taught me the importance of dodging and respecting attack patterns. This encounter marked the start of a steep but deeply satisfying learning curve. I had not expected bossing in a game like this, especially bossing that I had to dodge roll away from hits that would 100 to 0 my health. So coming from Lost Ark, this was a fairly nice surprise for me. Co-op play added another dimension to the experience. My friend Sorcerer, later swapped to Witch, highlighted the differences between ranged and melee gameplay. While melee combat felt visceral and rewarding, it also made boss fights feel noticeably harder. After struggling with my monk, I rolled a ranger alt to see how ranged gameplay compared when I opted to play solo. The shift was dramatic. Boss fights became more manageable with the ability to kite and position safely. Still, the satisfaction of landing heavy melee hits made it difficult to abandon my original class. Building my character has been one of the most enjoyable aspects of the game. Experimenting with skills, learning the significance of stats like accuracy and evasion, and slowly piecing together a functional build felt both challenging and rewarding. The ability to alt-click items for a quick tooltip summary made this process more accessible, especially as someone new to the series. It took me until the end of Act 2 to discover certain features, like additional skill slots accessed via keybinds, but those discoveries added to the sense of progression and mastery. Boss fights are where Path of Exile 2 truly shines, in my personal opinion. Each encounter feels distinct, with unique mechanics and patterns to learn. The Act 1 final boss stands out as one of the game's most memorable moments. Without spoiling too much, it's a challenging multi-phase battle that tested my skills and rewarded my perseverance. Not all boss encounters were as enjoyable. A double boss fight with an enrage mechanic if one was defeated before the other was particularly frustrating. However, these moments of frustration added the sense of overall achievement when I finally succeeded. The diversity in boss mechanics keeps each encounter fresh and ensures that no fight feels repetitive or predictable. As much as the boss fights are a highlight for me, I think the fact that each area had a boss and maybe a side boss with a reward attached to it was super cool, especially since I would constantly be swapping from a mobbing playstyle, then a few minutes later be doing bossing, unloading large amounts of damage, then getting away from the boss to then repeat and adhere to their patterns. My build would represent a 50-50 split between mobbing and bossing, and this kept the game and leveling super engaging for me. While the game's difficulty is one of its strengths, it also introduces some frustrations. Narrow corridors and choke points in certain maps often led to overwhelming swarms of mobs. These situations were exacerbated by the lack of checkpoints in some areas, making deaths feel maybe more punishing than they should have. Mobs respawn and reset after death, so these super large maps with less checkpoints and frustratingly mobile mobs and not so great layouts would set up super frustrating moments for me. The pre-boss area in Act 2 stands out as a particularly challenging section due to its combination of narrow paths, jumping mobs, and sparse checkpoints. Another frustration was the disappearing portals, which forced me to backtrack through entire zones after returning to town. I'm still unsure what causes the issue, but it's a source of unnecessary annoyance. I had this happen to me prior to getting to the Act 1 boss, and re-clearing the manor was one of the most painful experiences because it was late and I was annoyed that I had to do it all over again. At the moment of recording this, they don't have the teleport system where you can teleport to checkpoints, so re-clearing whole sections with super large maps, very frustrating. Additionally, the sprawling map designs in Act 3 felt excessive. While exploration is generally rewarding, the lack of meaningful loot or secrets in many areas made these oversized maps feel like filler content, and this bloat was basically strictly only in Act 3. Act 1 is a pretty good size, 2 is slightly large but fine, but 3 just gets super absurd and excessive as you push the main quest. Mobs would occasionally just push me during their attacks, which looked like rubber banding, and that was the closest thing I experienced to lag or server issues throughout my whole gameplay session. Also, the map is cool in theory, but I find it super hard to understand what the hell I'm looking at, and I'm 50 hours into the game, and I'm still lost sometimes as to what the symbols mean, and sometimes waypoints will just get lost in the clutter. Very unintuitive in my opinion. The only other standout suspect thing to me was the quality of life stash tabs being a paid item. To my current knowledge, this currency is only accessible via the cash shop, so something that is inherently just something to make your life easier feels a little odd being gated behind a paywall. But I've heard this is something that goes all the way back to the first game, and people are just fine with that, so I guess it is what it is. I'm still gonna list it as a gripe. I get it's a free-to-play game, this just feels odd to me with how valuable some of these slotting systems are. Early on, or about basically midway through the Act 2, I hit a wall with my build and sought advice online. Adapting to a more meta-focused build improved my performance dramatically, but I'm glad I experimented on my own first. This trial and error approach helped me understand the game's mechanics and how gearing impacts performance. I learned the hard way that the outdated gear was often the root of my struggles, a common mistake for new players, I presume. The simplest action of checking your vendor every time you clear a boss to see what the new reset vendor has goes a long way at clearing out outdated, underleveled gear and keeping you fresh. I think many novice players, like me, dropped a gold item, exalted it, then kept it way too long until you start getting deleted by mobs. But instead of just one item in this example, it's probably the whole kit. The game's gearing system is both a challenge and a reward. Vendors update their stock after significant achievements or boss kills, offering some of the best gear available early on. Understanding this system and staying vigilant about upgrades made a noticeable difference in my ability to progress. Overall, Path of Exile 2 has exceeded my expectations. Its challenging gameplay, rewarding boss encounters, and deep build customization have kept me engaged throughout my first 50 hours. While it's not without its flaws, tedious map designs, frustrating deaths, and minor quality of life issues, positives far outweigh the negatives. For fans of the genre, the $30 early access price tag is a worthwhile investment. The fact that the cost converts to an in-game currency adds value, though I'm not a fan of essential quality of life features being locked behind paywalls. For those who prefer to wait, the free-to-play release will still offer a rich and rewarding experience when it does arrive in 6 months plus. As someone who approached this game as a complete newcomer, I've been thoroughly impressed by its depth and complexity. I'm excited to explore the endgame and see what else Path of Exile 2 has to offer. Whether you're a veteran ARPG player or a curious newcomer like me, this game is well worth your time and attention. I extremely enjoyed my time with it and highly recommend this game to folks who would be interested in this combination of building a build that can take on challenges, whether it be mobs set out to swarm you, or just being able to read a boss's pattern, sidestep them, and then finish them off before their extremely powerful abilities one-shot you. Let me know if you've tried the game out, and what you liked or disliked about it. What was your class of choice, and did you hate your life as Melee? Irregardless, my name is EasyBreak, and I'll see you in the next one. Toodaloo.